Hi and welcome to another Retvlog, and got up this morning and found out that I've actually now got access to the BFA Alpha. So while we wait for it to download, what are we going to talk about? I know, I'm going to talk about the posts I've just put up yesterday. So on both the North American and the EU forums, because I can post on both now. I'm having to pay for it, but I can do that now. I posted my Battle for Azeroth Ret post. Now, lots of people do these, of course. Anyone who is interested in their class or spec is obviously going to want to have their say. And it's important that that happens. And this is sort of part of what I want this video to be about. But you'll see various posts. Some people will just redesign the whole spec and put it up there. That's fine if you want to do that as a creative thing. It's not going to go anywhere. I mean, someone might say to me, wouldn't I like the opportunity to rewrite it? Of course I would. But what is the point? It's not going to go anywhere. First of all, a complete rewrite of stuff or a major change in direction of the spec. You're basically just telling the developers, you don't know what you're doing, let me take over. Well, how far is that going to get you? The second thing is that if you're going to have major redesigns, it's going to take more development time. Well, they're not putting that in. They're not going to put more in because, oh, do you know what? Some guy on the forum said we should do this. So I've come at it from the point of view of things that you could put in like that. You know, if Ian Hazakostas, let's say, just in some world of fantasy, read the post and went, oh, I want all these things in. He's totally convinced me. I want all them in. The development team could put them in immediately. All that would require to do is just to test them out. They could put them in the very next alpha build. And then, you know, it'd have all that time to test it. I don't think they will. My hope is simply that they pay attention to it and maybe the odd thing sneaks in at some point. And this is what I want people to do. What I want people to do is to sort of read it. I've got links down below to both the North American post and the EU post. I'm going to go in more detail now about the sort of things I'm coming at and the reasons for them. If you don't agree with them, obviously don't do anything. But if you do agree with them, at the very least, upvote it. Preferably add your own comments as well. And actually, if you disagree, then by all means, put your comments in disagreeing as well. But the key thing is, if we have a post that has a lot of people engaged in it, inevitably, it will come to the attention of developers. And with something like this, as I say, if they're looking at a post that's talking about a major departure from what they're already doing or goes against their stated class design philosophy, they're not going to do anything with it. But if it's in line with their class design philosophy and it's the sort of thing that's very easy to put in place and just to try it out if nothing else, then what's the harm? That sort of thing has a good chance of success. And that's what this is about. It's about trying to get the edges smoothed out rather than taking a radically different direction, which is not going to happen anyway. So I put 5 things in. I said I was going to condense it down to 3 things. I ended up condensing it down to 5 things. I could have written loads, by the way. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, you know, everything's wrong. Some people are posting there going, there were some strange comments about, oh, it needs a major redesign because Ret is not very fun at the moment. To which I'm thinking, why are you playing Ret? Why are you playing if it's not fun? So, of course I enjoy playing Ret. I'm going to be playing it in the next expansion and the expansion after that, and I'll keep playing it for as long as I can keep playing it. But that doesn't mean to say there aren't a few edges to smooth over, and there's a lot of them. And even getting a few of them would be good. So the first one, of course, I've talked about as a retribution passive. I don't need to go into detail on this one. I've talked about this one before. It's as simple as this. I'm going to, again, potted history. When I first got into the Legion Alpha, do you know what? The Retribution passive wasn't a 20% damage increase. It was a 100% damage increase. That's how off the wall this ability was. They thought that when someone dies, getting a 100% damage bonus for 20 seconds was a bit of fun, a bit of flavour. Wasn't a big cooldown at all. Wasn't a big change. You know, they kept coming up with this line all the way through the Legion Alpha and the Beta. Oh, you know, it's just a bit of fun. It's a bit of flat class fantasy. We're not going to take it into account when we're doing our balancing. 100%? Every time someone dies for 20 seconds, that is a beast of a cooldown. Has anyone got a DPS cooldown as good as that? I don't think so. And that is something that every time someone dies. Obviously, that didn't last that long. That got nerfed down to 50%. Even 50% is ridiculous. We now know that even 20% has a massive effect. 20, you know, you compare, I mean, I when you do a fight often enough, sometimes you do fights where, you know, it really doesn't matter whether people die or not. You know, if people get good, they don't die, the boss just dies quicker. But the boss will still die as long as there's enough people up alive. So in Tomb of Sargeras, the Sisters was the classic one there. Antoran High Command, I would suggest, is the classic one in Antorus. But there's a few fights like that. And you can look at yourself. Antoran High Command, you can do it like week after week after week. And, you know, and when you're first doing it and a few people die, really good logs. And then they start to go down a bit, the percentiles, because people aren't dying. And then one week, for whatever reason, something goes wrong, people die. And then all of a sudden it goes up again. So it has a material effect on your DPS. Blizzard have since acknowledged that, because they moved from their line. They first of all moved from, it has no effect on the class and therefore doesn't need to be taken into account with tuning, which obviously was untrue. Then they said, okay, it has an effect, but people don't game it. People don't take advantage of it. You what? But even if they did or they didn't, it really doesn't matter. It has a material effect. So when we're being tuned around the idea that we're not overpowered if lots of people die. So it doesn't take a lot of extrapolating to work out what happens when no one dies. It's heinous. Argus is a classic example. I remember, you know, doing really well on Argus, on Heroic, that is, when we were first killing it, because lots of people died. And then a few weeks later, people stopped dying. It's like, hang on a minute, people aren't dying anymore. What's going on? Damage, damage, down, 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 down. So that needs removing. Ideally, the whole thing will be removed, but at least the damage component is my argument. The damage component needs to be removed. They can keep the damage reduction. A lot of people even forget that it does 30% damage reduction. That's fine. No one's going to complain about that. And that doesn't have an effect on the logs. That's fantastic. Okay? Or give us a movement speed just to meme us. Oh, if someone dies, you get a bit of a movement speed boost. Something like that. I mean, obviously, you know, that's not going to necessarily make a lot of sense. But then again, the damage boost doesn't make a lot of sense. You could even I suggest you could just make us glow yellow. Just have us glow yellow as in, we're really angry, we're glowing yellow with the holy light. That'll be fine. That's class fantasy. That's fine. Doesn't have an effect on damage. That's okay. Do that. But the damage component needs removing. Otherwise, we are impossible to tune. And that means that you'll keep having the situation which we've had all through Legion where on progress will look really good. And people will sometimes overestimate the effect of it as well. They'll think that you're only good, you're only doing well because you have this thing, because we're wiping, because we're progressing. And they'll be convinced that when the boss is ready to die, as sometimes actually is the case, sometimes this is true, but sometimes it's not, they'll think, oh, well, people will stop dying and your damage will be rubbish. Which may be true, but it may not be. And it's really very difficult to sort of tell. The second one I was talking about, Shield Avengers. This is a much more minor one. But again, all of these have to be minor ones that could easily be changed. Shield Avengers is a bit of a minor annoyance in that, of course, by doing damage makes it a damage ability, not a defensive. But that's not the annoyance. The annoyance is that it will only do damage if you manage to completely exhaust the Absorb Shield. Now, sometimes this is very easy. Sometimes it's very difficult. And the big annoyance factor, for me anyway, I'm not sure about other people, is that sometimes you'll know some damage is incoming and you know it's enough to break your shield. So you pop your Shield Avengers just before it happens. And then sometimes your Shield Avengers crits, which basically means it's got double the absorb. That can sometimes mean that incoming damage that's about to happen doesn't break it. You're left with a few thousand. Now, if there's something you can just step in for a second to burst it, that's not a big deal. Great, you get extra. The crit is useful then. But if not, and you're not going to be able to take any more damage for ages, then that shield's not going to be... The absorb's not going to be fully consumed, which means you can do 0 damage. So actually, this is an ability, a damage ability, that when it crits, sometimes does no damage. Instead of double damage, it can actually do no damage. That's really annoying. So what you... And also just the negative aspect of it, what it means is that... Because you want to use it on cooldown as much as possible, and it's encouraging you to do something that you wouldn't ordinarily do. I'll give you a case in point. On Coven, for example, the first time I use Shield of Vengeance, usually is just in time for the storm. Sometimes, of course, you can pop Shield of Vengeance early on, and it'll just naturally pop anyway, but it may not. So to be sure, I wait for the first storm to come in, and then I deliberately stay outside of the safe zone until my shield has burst. Then I go in. Which inevitably means I will take a little bit of extra damage because you can't time it perfectly. You know, the tick of damage that breaks your shield will also carry on and do some damage to you as well. So I'm deliberately taking unnecessary damage to maximize my damage on the boss because of it. And there's all sorts of situations where I will do that as well. Wherever I can, if my Shield of Vengeance is available to use and I think I can take some damage, whether it's damage that I have to take or not, then I will pop that shield immediately to get as many uses out of it as possible, because that's what you do with the damage ability. So with Shield of Vengeance, for me, I mean, either remove the damage component and change the name of it, like Divine Protection, but keep it as an Absorb Shield if you want. I'd prefer a damage reduction, but an Absorb Shield if they must, that's okay. Or acknowledge that it is a DPS ability, and instead of forcing us to have to consume the entire shield, allow it to do damage based on how much of the absorb has been done. So if it absorbs 80% of the shield, then it will do 80% of the shield's worth of damage, you know, when it expires. It has to do one of those two things, because at the moment, it's just going to be one of those things. It's a relatively minor annoyance. It's not as big a deal as the Retribution passive, but at the same time, it is still a deal. It is still something that's not good. It changes our behaviour in a negative way, and also just it doesn't work. Just like the Retribution passive, in fact, it's something where your damage is being based on RNG, not skill. Skill and premeditation can help you get the most out of it, but it doesn't guarantee it. That's the problem with it. And it should. You know, planning ahead and skill should allow you to maximise the benefit of your spec. And when you've got abilities in there that work against that, then they should be removed or changed. So the third one I was talking about was Divine Tempest. Now, the reason I mention this is because in Blizzard's class design philosophy post, they were obviously talking about artifacts. Now, everyone is going to be losing a whole host of abilities that are currently attached to our artifacts. We're no different. There's a lot of them. Some people focus on the big ones, but there's quite a lot of them. Now, we know we're losing most of them. There's no point in trying to make an argument to keep all of them. And there's no point in making an argument to keep anything that seems to be against Blizzard's design philosophy. They mentioned two types of artifact ability which may be retained in some form or other. The first type is anything that affects our resource generation, so I'll come on to that next. And the second type was anything that forms a fundamental part of our gameplay. Divine Tempest massively changes not just the nature of Divine Storm, but how we use it. So old style Divine Storm without the artifact, without the Ashbringer, basically just does a load of damage in 8-yard radius. It's around us. Now what that means is, so if we've got a group of mobs and want to Divine Storm them, with the old-fashioned Divine Storm, which we're going back to, we assume, we'd stand in the middle of those mobs to maximise our range on it. Stand in the middle, maximise the range. With Divine Tempest, it's the other way around, so it goes 20 yards forwards. Now, we don't want to be stood in the middle. We want to be on the edge, aiming it through the thickest part of it. But also it allows us to do a few other things that we can't do with normal Divine Storm. It allows us to aim it through one mob to another that's up to 20 yards away. So again, coming back to Coven as an example, if you've got the two bosses tanked as close to each other as you can without them obviously getting the damage reduction, that's close enough for you to be able to fire Divine Storm through both of them. So I actually, at the start of the fight, tend to fire Divine Storm and hit both bosses as a result of it. My judgment doesn't jump to the other one, unfortunately, so it's not as helpful as it could be, but it's still a slight benefit to be able to do that. Other things you can do it for, if mobs are just not grouped up very well as well, they're sort of a bit scattered in a dungeon or something like that, it still allows you, if you're careful with your positioning, to move around and fire Divine Storm and still hit loads of mobs. It also allows you, if let's say if you've had to run out for something, you're running back, you've got a load of holy power, but you've also got all your builders ready. You're just wasting it at the moment. You can't get in there to do a Templar's Verdict. You can fire off a Divine Storm while you're still running in, knowing full well that you can use your builders, you know, I mean, Blade of Justice, for a start, can be used before you get in melee range as well, to get your holy power back up. So there's a benefit there as well. So effectively using it as a ranged ability. So all of those things do have a fundamental effect on the way we play. If you're using Divine Tempest to its fullest, we are clearly going to change our gameplay just based on the loss of Divine Tempest. That sort of means that it fulfills the criteria for potentially being retained. Doesn't mean to say it has to be retained, but potentially. So again, if there's plenty of people that are in favour of that, you need to sort of go on these posts and sort of say that, because it is the sort of thing that is in line with their stated philosophy. Now, so we talked about, you know, artifact traits which affect the fundamental play of the game. Now on to resource generation. So here we're talking about Wake of Ashes. More specifically, Ashes to Ashes, which is the trait that buffs Wake of Ashes. Bearing in mind that baseline Wake of Ashes does not generate any holy power. But with the Ashes to Ashes trait. Now at the moment on the BFA Alpha, this is a talent. But it's very important for our resource generation. At the moment, what we've got, with that as a talent, let's say you don't take that talent, all you've got to generate your holy power is Crusader Strike and Blade of Justice. Now, they did say in their post that where an artifact was important in resource generation, they talked about the fact that what they'd like to do is just basically increase the resource generation of the abilities that remain. But for us, that's 2. Now, I saw one comment on the post saying that they'd be okay with not having Wake of Ashes baseline if they just increase the resource generation rate of those abilities, like they said they'd do in their post. There's a couple of things, though. First of all, they seem to have moved away from it. It's actually really weird. I don't know why. Maybe there's something coming. But they've actually increased the cooldown on those builders instead of reducing it, which is what needs to happen. But the other thing is, what we're going to be in, we'll be in a situation where it'll be a bit like playing Rogue Combat Spec, the old Combat Spec, where they spam Sinister Strike. We're just going to be spamming Crusader Strike. The only way that it could work is if they put Crusader Strike effectively on a really short cooldown or recharge time, because it's 2 charges. A bit like having Fires of Justice baseline, or at least that effect of it. And it'll be just like spamming Crusader. Does anyone actually just want to spam Crusader Strike all the time? Not really. And I know Wake of Ashes, like at the moment, has a 30-second cooldown. It's 45-second cooldown in the talented version. 30-second cooldown. So you're not spamming that exactly. It's not in the normal rotation. But it allows you, what Wake of Ashes allows you to do, and again, this comes to gameplay, on fights where you suddenly need a bit of burst, it allows you to do that. So Gul'dan, for example, there were 2 times when it was really useful on Gul'dan. First of all, with the Eyes of Gul'dan, that was something you knew was coming, but at the same time, you also wanted to maintain a lot of DPS on Gul'dan. So you didn't just want to pull your holy power. So what you could do is you could still carry on your rotation, and when the Eyes spawned up, if you had 3 holy power, Divine Storm through them. If not, Wake of Ashes, Divine Storm through them. So that allows you to be in a position where you can burst that AoE when you need it. And then the other time, later on in Gul'dan, of course, with the Parasites. Actually, it had the added benefit on the Parasites of also stunning them, but that's neither here nor there for this purpose. What it again allowed you to do was have that burst to AoE them down really quickly. Something that has to die in a second or 2. It allows you to do that. Removing it means we no longer have that burst capability. The only thing we can do is pull. And that means taking off. That means stopping damage altogether for a few seconds at least on the boss, which is not ideal. Whereas some other classes and specs don't have to do that. You know, so the Wake of Ashes does allow that input tactic. So I think it should be baseline, and I think it should be baseline as it is now, the 30 seconds baseline. And it'll be easy to do now. And then that brings me to the 5th one, was, well, if we take it off there, what do we do? Does that mean they have to come up with another talent for the level 100 row? Because Holy Wrath is going, thankfully. No. Because it's not as simple as that. At the moment, I am told that with the talents at the moment, the level 100 talents, Divine Purpose, Crusade, which remember now will be a 20-second one, and Wake of Ashes, that they're actually all nicely balanced. If you suddenly make Wake of Ashes baseline, all of a sudden, even the 2 remaining ones, Divine Purpose and Crusade, are not balanced anymore. Crusade is made more powerful with Wake of Ashes. So the way things are in BFA at the moment, you can't have Wake of Ashes and Crusade. So you don't get to build up your stacks that super quickly. Remember, at the moment, what you want to do is, at the start of a fight, you want at least 3 holy power before you use Crusade. So you use like Blade of Justice, whatever, and Judge, and then Crusade, and then you spend Wake of Ashes, spend Crusader Strike, spend Blade of Justice, Crusader Strike, spend blah 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 blah, and you build up really quickly. And remember with Crusade, because it doesn't just stack up your damage, it stacks up your haste. So if you even get like 8 or 9 holy power spent really quickly, that's also increasing your haste, which means the cooldown of your builders come off more quickly, which means the other ones build up more quickly. It has a domino effect. So, yeah, making Wake of Ashes baseline will make Crusade more powerful. And that is the slight downside there. But my thought on that one was, well, stop trying to balance Crusade with other things that don't do the same thing, like Divine Purpose. Move Divine Purpose somewhere else in the talent tree, and just have, as the bottom row, all talents that affect Avenging Wrath. So in other words, Avenging Wrath as it actually is in baseline form, we will never use, because we'll just use a talent that changes it in some way. And there's a whole host of ones we could choose from. I mean, obviously we've already got Crusade there. Liadrian's Fury Unleashed works during Crusade. We're losing legendaries. Well, why not just bake that in? I know it's going to be a bit weird to begin with when they bring these talents in, because it's just the same as Liadrian's Fury Unleashed. But, you know, just put it in. Put that in. I was suggesting Hammer of Wrath. Now, Hammer of Wrath, of course, we're not going to get back as an ability as it used to be, because it was an execute, or it was seen as an execute. But for me, the greatest effect of it was not the execute. It was the fact that it could be used during Avenging Wrath as well. So just bring back Hammer of Wrath, but not as an execute ability, specifically as something that can be used during Avenging Wrath. So in Avenging Wrath, this ability suddenly becomes available, generates a holy power, can be used at ranged, does a decent amount of damage, that sort of thing. And that's, you know, and that's 3. That's just 3 pulled out my arse. But there's other ones that could be as well. People have been noting that there are various spells that have been pulled from the datamine files that are not assigned, not categorized. They're actually Legion ones. People looking at, oh, is Blizzard planning on doing this for BFA? Well, they may be, but in actual fact, they're nothing new, these spells, because they were, you know, they were in the Legion files as well. They just never used. One of them was an interesting one, which was something called Reach of the High Lord, and it basically meant that during Avenging Wrath, your normal abilities became ranged. So your Crusader Strike, your Blade of Justice, which is always a little bit ranged, but much higher range, Templar's Verdict, that sort of thing, all of a sudden became ranged. So during Avenging Wrath, you could actually be 40 yards away from something and doing your normal melee rotation. That sounds all right. That sounds okay. I'll be okay with that. Again, there's plenty of options for changing the way Avenging Wrath works, which would, again, bring us genuine choice with a talent as well anyway. Because there'll be different situations. Okay, in that situation, I'd like to use this talent. In this situation, I'd like to use that one. That's what we want from talents. And whenever you have a row where you modify a single baseline ability, you do tend to find that you do actually have genuine choice. So that's what I'd be in favour of. Now, there are plenty of other things I would like as well. But for me, those 5 things were the sort of things that I'm not saying, you know, even if 100 people upvoted it or 1,000 people upvoted it, but I am hoping you will. That they'll go, oh, everyone's in favour of this, let's just do it. I don't think that would happen. But I do think it would be brought to their attention, and I do think that they might take it seriously. And if just the odd one made it through. I mean, think about what I would have said if I'd have done something like this for the Legion Alpha. You know, what would have been my things to have put in the post? I would have put about Greater Blessing of Might. That needed removing. It eventually was removed, but, you know, not until after it had gone live. I would have put in Holy Wrath. You know, I'd have put in, at the time, remember, most of the way through, well, all the way through the Alpha and most of the way through the Beta, we didn't have any baseline movement speed. We now have Divine Steed. That was just a talent. You know, before it went live, they did actually make that change. But nonetheless, for most, so that's something I would have had in the post, that we should have a baseline, because we were the only ones, only melee without a baseline movement speed. What else would I have talked about? The Retribution passive itself was always going to be a bad one. So I'd have been talking about that as well. All of those things would have gone in the post. The fact that Crusade was untunable. It was impossible to tune it because of the nature of it, and also because of the traits we have to buff the cooldown of it. It was impossible to put Crusade in a talent row where we'd ever take anything else. So those would have been my 5 things there. And all 5 things have since been justified. So what I would like here is to get plenty of engagement with these posts. So, you know, I would urge all of you to engage with the post. Don't obviously blindly upvote it if you don't agree with what I'm saying, but engage with it, please. Get these posts noticed. So at the very least, if nothing happens, if absolutely nothing happens, we get a little pat on the head that says, that's nice. Keep your feedback coming in. We're really interested. And nothing comes of it, that in a year's time, when a game were justified on all 5 points, we can at least just show it and go, look, do you know what? This wasn't even just one person. There were lots of people that agreed with this. We said this. We told you. You saw it, and you still ignored it. And just like in Legion, we've been justified. And you know, and in my head, I don't know whether this would ever be reality. Maybe it just gets them to start to think a little bit about, maybe we should listen to the community every now and then. I can understand when they can easily ignore like 1 or 2 people. But if everyone who watches this video, because I don't know how many people are going to watch this video, but when I put these out, it's always over 1,000 people or 1,000 views. I don't know about people. If everyone, whether it was the EU, the NA forums you have access to, obviously I'm not expecting anyone else to have access to both, and you just upvoted it, and preferably upvoted and put a comment on it, then that would make it a post with a lot of engagement by any standards. So that's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm asking for. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below, but more importantly on the comments on the actual forums where I've posted these. The links are in the description below. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a like as usual. Subscribe if this is the first time to my channel. I will be on the alpha. I will be streaming some alpha every now and then as well. Not always just from the Ret Paladin point of view, but obviously I'm going to be doing Ret Paladin first of all. I'm going to be streaming that in a few hours, in fact, at the point at which I put this out. Until next time, I'll see you later.